Asan is still is in Bangkok. Oh, dia Bangkok. Yeah, in Bangkok. Oh, is in Bangkok. Sebab dia baru habis CBP.
Anas, sekejap bagi aku 30 saat bagi kau bunyi tadi. Sekejap.
Tak pun tengok tak depan.
Oh, you're here, right?
Yeah.
We'll wait for Paan and then we'll start.
Sorry ya, CG got wife. I'm sorry. Part of the contract.
Okay.
You're being recorded.
Yes, okay.
Alright, let's go. Okay.
For your Prime Minister, shall I?
Wow. What's this?
So I'm listening.
Uniquely, BRICS is always about emerging economies first.
Yeah.
I don't think this debate then has to be essentially about whether you're going to take it into China or not.
Yeah.
Because you need to understand, in BRICS, everyone thinks as an emerging economy first. And secondarily, whether you want to align with any of the interests of people who are in the membership of BRICS. I think this is very important context. Given that currently we are living in a multipolar world and you do not know where you're going to align with, I think Malaysia's consistent stance is to be aligning in BRICS instead of trying to be directly aligning with any other country in particular. We'll explain more in my arguments. But I think uniquely, what does BRICS offer? I think it looks like you're supporting emerging economies, but it's not just any kind of support. It's also the way that you give conditional aid, not conditional aid, maybe some level of that aid. But it's also the way that you have a bank in which that you can actually help and give those aids in the first place. But it's also the way that, and most importantly, because of the fact that the US is declining in favor of a foreign reserve, right? Because previously they have been considered as the strongest kind of reserve. What we need is an alternative in order for you to consider how and what kind of other alternatives and foreign reserves that you have in order for you to strategically ensure that you are insulated before the cascading effect of the economy being declining. I think this is important. Secondly, I think the status quo, Malaysia currently has no favorites. We don't particularly want to align with China, we don't particularly want to align with the US. I think in this instance then, it is best that we act as a counterweight against whatever is happening in the multipolar world. We do not want to align with anyone because as a developing economy, an emerging economy with upward trajectory some more, it's easier and better for you to just get the result of to just get the outcome of whatever that is happening right now by you distancing yourself and not putting and not having any absolute moral standpoint in the US-China war. I think this is very important. The framing here is simple. I think it's number one, how do we get the most amount of growth in development? Number two, how do you get the best amount of how do you get the best out of the foreign policies when you align with who, right? Because it's very important. Op generally cannot just say that you don't want to align with anyone at all, because you need to take the burden of you having more bilateral agreements in general. Yes.
Yeah, so the motion supports Malaysia's application to join BRICS. How does your side of the house able to distance yourself from other people?
Yeah, amazing. That's my first argument. I think the point in which I understand how BRICS work is that generally this debate is essentially you not trying to engage with any particular country directly. This is important because BRICS is not a pivot in order for you to align yourself with China. And I think this is something that's possible from CO. Because the point is to understand, in BRICS, you act as an emerging economy front first, which means in BRICS itself currently, whenever China has a policy that is pivoting to them, India acts as a counterweight. Whenever India wants something that's good for them, and just personally in their own incentives, you have Brazil acting against them. The point in which that you understand how BRICS work, and you generally need to have a consensus on what works for all emerging economies, that is the most important front that is happening in this debate, right? I think that this is how my first argument going to go. The first is to understand that you need to act as a counterweight force. This is important because if you don't do this now, you will get sucked up into whatever that is happening currently, right? because you know that there is an increasing amount of tension in order, like in the US-China pivoting, right? The US-China polarization is making other countries forced to pressure to actually take a stance on who you want to be aligned with. But Malaysia is unique. We have the capacity to act against that and actually align with other emerging economies that can solidify our stance, right? Uniquely then, what does it mean? I think Malaysia has the unique capacity in terms of us actually having the strategic trade routes that are important, because everywhere around the world and any other country has to go through the Malacca. That route. Yeah. The second is also because we are a rising semiconductor. We have a rising semiconductor industry. This is unique, and Syafiq will explain it as well. But the point is to understand semiconductors are very important in terms of how the rise of military surveillance technology or just military technology in general requires semiconductors to be produced. That's why Malaysia is very important as part of the supply chain that is happening. And we have the unique capacity because currently we are not aligned with anyone, right? I think being in BRICS means that we get to insulate ourselves before we actually get to be sucked up into whatever that is happening. Either you want to be with the US or China, right? I think that the third thing to understand here is that we need to disengage from direct foreign intervention. This is important, manner, because the point is that you have to you have any foreign intervention that is direct, that is going to influence your decision making as a country and absorb any level of authority in order for you to actually be able to create your own decisions importantly. Because you need to consider who you're aligning first, and if this particular decision making, especially in foreign policy and foreign economic policy, is on how it's going to affect them. I think the impacts are very simple. I think absent of this, the inability for you to solidify when you stand where you stand at, and more like, and that means like you have to pander more towards a particular country in isolation because you're doing a lot of things alone. I think the second argument here then is about why is it important as a developing economy, right? Because Malaysia already has this unique capacity. I think Syafiq will explain more about why the BRICS is an important thing about like spearheading movement. I think I don't really understand this argument sometimes. But the point is to understand Malaysia is an emerging economy that has an outward or progressive trajectory, right? What this means is that it is best for you to align and stay in these groups in order for you to collaborate in terms of or adapt at least what kind of economic policies that are happening. Because as an emerging economy, it's best for you to consider other emerging economies. I think this is very simple and it's intuitive for you to understand. In consideration, in differentiation of maybe in op, you have to defend the idea of you having to adapt maybe something from the IMF or maybe something from I don't fucking know any other international banks or any other person that is telling you. But the point in which that you have someone that is more proximate in nature of what their actual exports are, because Brazil, for example, is relying on Malaysia in terms of their agricultural exports. It's also the way that China, also to some extent, shares some level of support when it comes to any other commodities, right? Point is, you need to align yourself with people who actually has the most amount of similarity when it comes to economy. This is why it's easier for you to actually develop your own economy first, because you cannot align with the US. The US doesn't understand because the US doesn't have the same level of commodities or exports that you have as Malaysia, right? Uniquely then, BRICS is generally doing well as well. And the economic powerhouses such as India, China, and Brazil is also the reason why we should be aligning ourselves better with them. And it because it's much more proximate. Uniquely, this is a little bit radical, but understand the okay. But the point is, go for BRICS.
Thank you for the fine speech. Leader of opposition, would you ready?
Yes.
In a bipolar world, the smartest play for Malaysia is the smartest play for a growing developing economy like Malaysia is to remain neutral and to negotiate bilaterally with both the Eastern and Western bloc or collectively as ASEAN. I think it is actually not in your interest to align yourself with emerging economies because all emerging economies are competing for the same resources, the same consumer market. It is unclear as to why Malaysia is better off within a bloc of all countries that are looking for the same thing. I want to talk about two things in this speech. The first thing you'll get from opening opposition is the explanation as to why remaining neutral is not just possible, it is better than joining BRICS. And second, I'm going to take the gov at the back and explain why BRICS is particularly a bad organization to join. Let's first talk about neutrality. We would argue that the exact same contextual argument argument that the Prime Minister explained with regards to Malaysia being a semiconductor hub, Malaysia producing things like rubber and rice and agriculture and manufacturing are the same on both sides of the house. And these are reasons for countries to engage in trade with Malaysia because of the things that we produce, whether you join BRICS or not. So there's an incentive because Malaysia has a comparative advantage with the production of those types of things, especially with the rise of generative AI. The demand for tech and semiconductors is only going to increase. Malaysia has agriculture, has oil, semiconductors, financial products. Malaysia is also strategically located, as OG identifies, in Southeast Asia, controlling the South China Sea as well as the Straits of Malacca, strategic trade routes and transport routes throughout the world. So in the best case in the Gulf world, where the BRICS give you some benefits, and I'm not sure what disengaging from other people looks like, it is important for Malaysia to maintain the perception of neutrality because there are other powers in the world, other blocs in the world that could also potentially give you some benefits as well. And in as much as the EU and the US have their own problems, they are also very large consumer markets that have strong economic potential as well. Last year, the Biden administration announced the Inflation Reduction Act with more than $3 billion investment into renewables and other sectors of the economy. The EU market through the EU CBAM and other subsidies that they are having for developing economies, like the EU delegation in Malaysia, is a huge trade benefit for Malaysia as well. These are countries that are relatively rich, they have strong consumer markets, and are also likely to purchase the things that Malaysia produces as well. It's not perfect, but in a world where you align yourself with BRICS and you apply to join BRICS, it's much less likely for these countries to approach Malaysia for trade or to demand, if they do so, they're likely to demand very large concessions because they do not see trade as a means to exert soft power over Malaysia anymore, and they also see Malaysia as more likely to lean towards China and the other BRICS organization when it comes to international diplomacy and other international affairs. Also because just simply the threat by China, it is just unfair for this government team to say that China is not part of this debate. China is the world's largest economy, the second largest economy and the world's largest military superpower, and it's extremely possible for China to put pressure on the other members inside BRICS. It is unclear as to what the checks and balances to these things are on that side of the house in order to pressure Malaysia to make certain economic and diplomatic decisions. All these are reasons for the Western blocs and other nations not part of BRICS to want to align with you. Finally, we think that BRICS also puts the potential to put pressure on Malaysia, not just in economic terms, but also in regional security terms. Not now. For example, we know that China and Vietnam has had a conflict over the 9-dash line and the control of the South China Sea. We know that Sri Lanka has had this thing with the port with China. Pakistan took like $1 million in loans from China. They have border skirmishes and tensions as well. It is clear that being part of BRICS means you have to align yourself with what China wants. And if China wants the bloc to contribute, put troops on the ground, for instance, or contribute militarily, I think it's very difficult for Malaysia to say no as part of this bloc having shared economic interests and ties and stuff like that. Even if that's not the case, China may force you to pressure you to release information, things like data sharing, things like how much you're spending on national security. All these things are things that are not in the interest of Malaysia. How do you weigh this? One, the future is extremely uncertain. Geopolitical priorities can change over time. You have wars and conflicts happening, like suddenly Russia and Ukraine, suddenly Gaza came up as a problem again. You have economic crises all around the world as we emerge from post-COVID recession. All of these things mean that it is not clear whether BRICS is the best path for Malaysia in the future, and even if it is, we don't know for sure now. That's why it's important for us to retain neutrality, because that preserves our option to ally ourselves with other nations, to have bilateral trade, and to open up doors that side of the house is very likely to close. Before I explain why the best case of Gulf BRICS is terrible, yes?
Yeah, your characterization on the Chinese influence happens more under your side because Malaysia is operating in isolation, at least under BRICS. You have other people that can counterweight against them.
Yeah, so the assumption is that these other people in BRICS are going to counter you, right? I don't know what the incentive for India is to counter Chinese influence if it doesn't benefit them. I'm going to talk about why India is a particularly bad actor as well. Brazil is also going through political upheaval with Lula da Silva and stuff, so I'm not sure why that's particularly better. Comparative as well, I also want to flag that Malaysia does not necessarily need to bilaterally talk to China. They can do so through ASEAN, with Malaysia taking the ASEAN chairmanship next year. Bound to have a degree of influence on that as well. Okay, let's talk about why BRICS is particularly bad. The first thing is that it's dominated by China. I've already kind of alluded to this, but just to prove structurally that China is a pretty bad actor when it comes to this. One, China has a deflationary economic crisis. They are borrowing on debt and having a housing development bubble that has burst recently, which is why the Chinese Communist Party has reduced interest rates in an effort to stimulate spending. They have youth unemployment that is literally at 25%, one of the highest in the world. The pink culture because of the degree of inequality, which again shows that the unemployment is high, inequality is high, and the capacity to mobilize labor force is limited as well. They have an aging labor market because of the one-child policy. They are facing sanctions from the US because of the support of Russia and in the crisis between Russia and Ukraine. There's allegations of corruption with the CCP as well, and Xi Jinping is trying to crack down on arresting people. All of these things goes to show that China may not necessarily be the best actor diplomatically or economically when it comes to talking about BRICS. What about India? India is part of BRICS, but they refuse to de-dollarize, so they're still staking their economy on the American dollar, presumably to retain relationships with the US. But also, because Modi won the last election but lost his two-third margin in parliament, suggests that Modi is likely to prioritize his own internal domestic issues rather than regional negotiation with BRICS as well. Again, an incentive for them not to necessarily defend Malaysia from the predatory influences of China. That's how the House says that emerging economies need to stay together, but the problem is that all these BRICS nations are all producers. We all manufacture, we all send out agriculture. We are developing economies that don't necessarily buy from each other. It is the Western nations, the richer countries that are consumer markets that are most likely to buy the things that Malaysia produces. And we're going to get better concessions outside of the House. So when you just weigh everything up, right, what does Malaysia get exclusively from BRICS? I don't know what disengaging from direct interventions mean. I don't think Malaysia is directly intervening anywhere around the world, but I think you lose out potential allies in the West that may not necessarily be the best right now. For one, BRICS is clearly not the best actor in the world, and two, the future is uncertain and we don't know where things are going to go. The best, most strategic thing for Malaysia to do is to retain neutrality and our options for the future.
For a fine speech, to continue the debate, DPM.
Sorry, give me a minute. Right, ceremony speech. In 3, 2. I think it's unfair also from opening opposition to just dismiss the entirety of case coming from Emma. Here's why. I think Emma specifically explains to you why is it that the emerging economy should stand together. And I think it's not just because we want to depend on China. Because if you listen to the entirety of the language coming from opening opposition, is that China's bad, blah, 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 blah. And then after that, they say it's not important for you to rely on China specifically because China's the worst possible actor. And we specifically tell you that it is not in our interest to align with China in the first place because BRICS have other multiple countries that are in BRICS. The applied application also comes from multiple different countries, and it's not just specifically about China. In fact, the case that comes from opening opposition proves to you why China won't be able to dominate the conversation when it comes to bilateral trades in BRICS, for instance, right? Because they argue to you specifically that China has a lot of economic issues. The biggest case that you can make from this is the Beijing stimulus package, right? If you notice that the influx of money that is being pumped into the economy in China specifically is the biggest concern when it comes to investors from outside of the States. I know what it sounds like, right? It sounds like China is the worst possible actor. So why do we want to join BRICS? It's because it's not China that we want to target. We want to focus on other developing countries that are also in applications to join BRICS because they are emerging economies as well. That's why from the very get-go we tell you this debate is not supposed to be talking about China specifically because that's not the biggest interest. Because BRICS isn't equal to China specifically. That's specifically why we argue to you. But second, they say that, oh, look at China. There's a potential threat that can happen when it comes to China being able to pressure Malaysia specifically to listen to whatever that they do. Right now we're not in BRICS, but China is already everywhere in our country. US also does the same thing. What's the difference here then, right? In any case, I think there's a lot more
benefits on our side when we join BRICS, because specifically when it comes to getting influence, at least now there are other multiple actors that can act out on China's influence in Malaysia specifically, versus being in neutral zone where most of the time you would be listening to China. Just look at Anwar Ibrahim and you can tell specifically the alignment that this guy has, right? So I think joining BRICS would probably mitigate that a lot more. One of the biggest concerns is that I think, it's recorded, Malaysia probably thinks that Taiwan isn't an actual country. I think this is something that has already been clarified by Anwar Ibrahim. I think this is exactly why we joining BRICS means that we have less of this lunatic talking about China is supremacy. This is exactly where the point from our side needs to stand. But second, they say maintain neutrality, because at the end of the day, we can just wait until we become the biggest fucking economy so that we can get some changes to happen. One thing for sure, no, not yet. If you wait, right, the emerging economies are already one step ahead, what are you going to do next, right? Because at that point of time, you're no longer competing for the others, you're competing on your own because everyone else is already developed. But second, if you want to argue about the alignment with every other countries in the world, right, this is the exact moment. If all the countries that are applying to join BRICS are suppliers, there are certain things that we can also supply to them, right? They're not us suppliers, but they don't buy anything, because that's lunacy, right? Like people supply things, they also need raw materials. And that's where we get the raw materials from, when you are able to have bilateral trades when it comes to different countries working together. But secondly, they say that the biggest consumer that we have is the Western countries. Why in the world would we give up to the US, right? Because I think when it comes to the Western countries, it's a lot worse. There's a lot of different leniency that you cannot rely on. Like there's a political turmoil in the US specifically when it comes to trade, bilateral trades, etc. I don't know what's the fucking policy in the US now, right? As they still to be discussed. At that point of time, it's also uncertainty. But here's why our uncertainty is at least beneficial on our side. Because the uncertainty in BRICS means that you are pegging on the idea that there are also other emerging economies that are also on the rise, versus waiting for US to solve their problems. Only then you would join US and be like, you know what, US possibly, maybe possibly can be the best possible actor to join us. Before I go on to my speech, go ahead.
Yeah, so can you please flesh out the specific incentives for India, Brazil, and other BRICS countries to defend Malaysia from China?
I don't know, semiconductor. I'll explain to you specifically why my arguments about semiconductor is important, right? Context. I think the reason why semiconductor is very important right now is because everybody is pivoting away from Taiwan. Here's why. The trade war made it so that Taiwan is not as sexy as it used to be when it comes to getting like raw materials or getting like IC chips specifically, right? Semiconductor in Taiwan isn't developing as much. So they need to turn to an alternative. I'll give you an alternative, which is Malaysia. Here's why. The first thing is, when it comes to Malaysia being the next Taiwan, is there are a few challenges that we need to characterize. I'll characterize them to you now. Firstly, when it comes to funding for three things: development, transportation, and raw materials. Development, I think when it comes to the development of our IC technology in Malaysia, I think there's a lot of challenges specifically. We need 1.7 billion USD in order for us to be able to develop our semiconductor region to become the best possible region for us to replace Taiwan in the future. Where does the money come from? If you are neutral, right? I think it doesn't come from anywhere, because so long as there's not enough dependency on anything, or like the conformity that there's going to be a supply that's going to be targeted towards specific countries, you don't get that money. The way we get different is in BRICS, at least, right? There's a confirmation that you are going to get supplies from the other member states in BRICS, because technically now you are codependent. So that's how you get the money to be transferred, or at least to get some funding as a loan maybe for you to be able to get changes to happen, versus having to rely on the West to actually finally give a loan to you, because that means you will only pivot to the West. You will not pivot to China or anyone else, because you are solely reliant on the West. Here's where the unique material comes in, right? Because at this point of time, you are in interjection where multiple different countries are relying on the semiconductor industry, and they are all racing to give you money for that, so that you are able to develop yourself to become next Taiwan. Here's why it's better. Secondly, transportation of raw materials. Port Klang, as much as it's funny to sound, right? But Port Klang is actually very strategic when it comes to transportation of raw materials and semiconductor.
Yeah.
Here's exactly why it's good. Because transportation development means that Malaysia is in a very strategic position for them to be able to develop themselves to become the biggest semiconductor economy at the end of the day. Joining BRICS means that the dependency on the sector from other countries will also trickle into the US, into Malaysia, making it the biggest hub when it comes to semiconductor. Here's why it's politically very important, and this is the last thing that you're going to hear from me before I sit down. Legitimization of BRICS. As of now, BRICS is not legitimized as of yet, right? There's a lot of problems, as OO pointed out. Here's why Malaysia joining it will make it legitimized. We are now at a point where Malaysia cannot screw up. If we screw up, that means a lot of these influences will not make BRICS legitimized. That means our application to join BRICS is far more valuable in comparison to the rest. That means we put us ahead when it comes to all the applications from other countries. At this point of time, right, what do? Stay neutral or combine yourself and join BRICS and secure a position in BRICS so that you are becoming the biggest economy that you can get to help legitimize BRICS at the end of the day. Round of applause.
Thank you for that speech, Deborah.
That took a lot of me.
I can't wake up.
The first thing I'm going to do in this debate is tell you what BRICS is. BRICS was literally created as a bloc of countries to counter US influence.
Here.
That's the biggest thing in this debate that they miss. You can't say it's for emerging economies. By virtue, China and India alone make up 86% of BRICS. What the fuck does Brazil have to negotiate with China and fight back on behalf of other countries? It's not likely to be a democratic council where everyone sits around and talks about their issues. It's very likely to be dominated by these hegemonic large countries. And we gave you structural reasons for that. Russia is in a war. India has recently stepped away from China and refuses to dollarize. This means the only strong actor left is China, which is why a lot of the analysis from LO was telling you it was dominated by China and why that's a bad thing. I think they refuse to engage on that. They live this la la land where apparently countries can have some say in BRICS. Not true, guys. Gut check this. Literally built to counter the US, literally in numbers of GDP, dominated by certain countries. Like, I don't fucking know what Brazil and Argentina can say in BRICS. Secondly, they say, oh, US is declining and therefore must pivot away. Again, basic economics is called market cycle, guys. Goes down, it goes up. The point is, if you zoom out, traditionally, the US economy has always outperformed China. China, by virtue of an autocratic regime, people don't want to invest in it. By virtue of suspicious human labor practices, non-ESG compliant policies, people don't want to invest. If you look at the Chinese share price, it flips up, it goes up, it goes down. It's not a good investment in comparison to US companies, AI, Meta, Google, Facebook. All of these things are empirical examples. I trust the panel is smart enough to know facts in this debate. The third thing, they say, oh, but we're all for growth and development. Guys, this is not exclusive. We told you we are okay with neutrality because that gives us bilateral agreements, that gives us ASEAN and all these economic advantages. We can co-opt them from OG, right? They don't give us any analysis why BRICS is likely to be better. They just give us a bunch of things like, oh, trade is good. Yeah, we also have trade, guys. You also can approach these countries directly. And if you gut check this, Sweden and Switzerland, traditionally neutral countries, never took a position, never said anything controversial, never took part in any wars, and they are doing fine. Empirically, you know, if the World Bank has projected Malaysia to be a high growth economy, will reach the status of a developed nation by 2028. So all this bullshit about, you know, Malaysia needs money, yes, it is currently working at the point in which we remain neutral and can trade with both sides. And this is like basic economics, right? You want to expand the consumer base, you don't just want to sell to a particular bloc like BRICS, right? Why is it crazy that they say, you know, I also think it's crazy, they say the counterbalance is Brazil or Argentina versus China. And this way they don't respond to ELO because we told you, countries often compete for the same things. So if it is true and you know we believe their fantasy that it's all emerging economies, they all want the same thing. They all want to export their products, they all want protectionism. No one wants to buy products, right? That's an empiric problem with BRICS. When China is losing money, it has less incentive to create money outflow because they want to keep money in the country where the conditions are shit. This means that every country in BRICS wants to sell but nobody wants to buy. That's the reason why traditionally, and if you know facts, BRICS is not working. On paper, they have the numbers to surpass the US. In terms of economic cohesion, they can't. I'm going to talk about the two things we hung our hats on in this debate. One, neutrality, and secondly, why BRICS is an unreliable actor. First is neutrality, and this is assuming the best case from GAP that BRICS is like the best fucking thing in the world. One, we told you we are in a good spot right now. AI investment, $3 billion coming to Malaysia, right? All these US MNCs opening AI offices in Malaysia, it's because of our neutrality. A good intuition pump is Singapore, right? Again, we don't take positions on issues, we're in a strategic spot in the region. In fact, if you buy their port flying analysis, the very fact that Malaysia controls the Malacca Strait is the very reason we can play kingmaker between the US, between China. Every single trade that comes through the region, we have the ability to compare these deals and take what is better for us. Under their side, you lock people into BRICS, and that's the structural reason for this. Like we said, the US is less likely to approach you when you politically align yourself with China, when you economically align yourself with China and tie your economy to these things. That's why there's an opportunity cost. That's why they can't get all the benefits they talk about. If you believe simple economics that I want to sell to a larger consumer base, must take this debate. Secondly, they also never prove exclusivity in this debate. All of these things about economic things, competitive advantage, we can still approach the countries and trade bilaterally, no thank you. You can still, but under your side, bilateral deals go away because the US is less likely to invest in a region linked to China. It's less likely to invest new when they are linked to an administration that's been traditionally non-transparent, a tradition which is autocratic and not democratic. They know where the fuck the money is going. They're not going to put $3 billion if you align yourself with China. We also want to push back, right? We are not isolationists under GATT. The comparative that OG misses in debate is not us being alone versus us against China. It's us pitting, being able to pick and choose between two major forces in the region, being able to pick and choose which consumer base you want to sell to. That's better for our side. Definitely we win on the econs part. Secondly, why can't we get both? And this is where I really like clean up from hello. First thing is the opportunity cost. Every dollar you put into BRICS, which by the way it's not free guys, you put money into it, is a dollar you put less into the IMF and the World Bank. That's why there's an opportunity cost, like monetarily speaking, when and you have to choose between both things. I'll take closing if that's something later. Secondly, then we also lose out on economies on scale, right? Like everything that you produce for BRICS and produce for IMF, basically you lose out on economic scale, so you can produce less and you can't split yourself both ways. The last thing, and the reason why you definitely sell less under their side is because of supply chain issues. If you believe that China has traditionally produced the environment bad for human rights, lots of consumers in the Western market would not want to buy from a company that is linked to China, right? This looks like people pushing back against fast fashion, against Temu and Shine because they exploit child workers. This necessarily means your consumer base decreases. At the point in which now we are neutral, we can continue to sell to both Chinese companies and like more conservative people. We are in a good position to play kingmaker for both sides. We're in the best position to compare. OG, yeah.
Yeah, so Saudi is aligning with the US, but they're also applying to BRICS. Why do you think they, like Malaysia, will be uniquely locked out of the US?
So that also works against you, like the fact that Saudi is joining BRICS, but Iran is also in BRICS, also means that probably there will be some regional security issues. Like this itself goes to show you that BRICS will be arguing about things like geopolitical tension. Saudi and Iran in the same economic bloc, probably not going to come together and hold hands, and not everybody's going to develop as OG says, right? So that's nice, you're very okay. The last thing, why BRICS is unreliable, and we gave you structural reasons for this, all of which went unresponded to. Their assertion is just, but China will not dominate. Like numerically they will, but we give you examples. India stepping towards the dollar, like it or not, even if they said the USA is shit, the US and the USD is still the dominant reserve currency of the world. There is no competitor to the US dollar and the SWIFT payment transaction system. Like good luck defending that under your side of the house. In a position where Malaysia can have both Alipay and the SWIFT system, we are able to generate more FDIs into the country, more people can pay. Like compared to China, you can't even tap your card in most cases, so they only accept your own shitty banks. Sorry guys, I'll click this on the recording. The last thing we said was that China is unstable, and we gave you structural reasons for this. All of this means that it's more likely they'll draw money from the members. The fact that they're in a shitty economy means they're likely to make deals which only benefit them. And at the point in which 86 of BRICS is dominated by 2 countries, Malaysia does not have a say, right, in what kinds of deals it's made. It's very likely it will work towards China. All of these reasons, all must win the battle rights itself.
Thank you for the speech. Finishing the opening half, beginning the closing half. Member of government when you're ready.
Emma, macam biasa benda tu. Start my speech with 3, start my speech with 3, 2, 1. I agree, OG's box up in this debate for several reasons. They are correct to highlight that BRICS is not for emerging economy. It is an opposite nature to counter this US alternative because it's an alternative for economic option for other countries to rely on rather than Western. It's like the things that credit. This license credit is correct. The dollarization, this looks like you're not economically dependent, especially when you're sanctioned by the West. You still can co-depend with each other, like relationship with China, Russia, Iran, and also North Korea. When the sanctions come in, they're still able to stay sustainable. But if that's the case, why is that the debate? OG lose out this debate because they don't necessarily recognize how this neutrality looks like. Because we think it's more than that. We think it's how Malaysia is in a unique relationship right now, especially how you still necessarily able to join in BRICS, you don't necessarily piss off China and US, you're able to get the benefit of both. Hence, also Pre-Semifinals align. No, shut up. No, sorry, I mean like you didn't recognize. So this also aligned to what UNITEN wanted to able to diversify its economy and able to do things like strengthen its economy and create more job opportunity when more IDA necessarily come in. That's why they lose out this debate. They only do this bare minimum, no any incentive interaction between Malaysia, China, and US. You're able to get the benefit without peace at all. So if that's the case, what's the extension? Simple. 3. Number 1. Why China in BRICS won't necessarily aggressively retaliate, especially when within BRICS itself you have members, which they also didn't recognize. Second, why you don't necessarily also piss off US, and US is still going to invest with you, the fact that you're still in BRICS. Third, diversification, which I'm surprised they did not extend on that too. First, let's do with China. Why in China in BRICS they won't aggressively punishing their own particular members, etc. Because this is not bilateral relationship that you have with China with each individual country. It is a bloc. It's an economical discussion that you have specifically at ASEAN, as what PJ said too. Because they won't the harm that what PG also wanted to, both of you also wanted to highlight is that there is possible harm where China will screw over you things like shady deals, debt trap, etc. We think there is pre-existing awareness by multiple countries, where countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, and Pakistan are heavily affected and especially default on the loan and unable to pay back. So all these countries, especially Malaysia, will have expertise to consult with each other. How, when we are in BRICS, we make sure we are able to preemptive, unable to be in those particular conditions. But the second is that they are true also, is that they make up of multiple members. It's not just China which is fixed down at the started, it's also Brazil, India, and South America, whereby China don't want to piss them off because they also wanted to expand their hegemony, expand their economic leverage, and also telling the idea that stop, go for West, come to us. So there's even more initiative not to them, rely on West, anger them, but also create a more harmonious relationship. They're able to come to a common ground, how we're able to gain economic leverage on this. This looks like strategically able to negotiate as long as we are equal, as long as we support each other, and be able to have this ability to have economical gain. Recognize the second level on this is also, there is a rise when the Middle Eastern country, I'm not sure about Iraq, I'm really not sure, coming in also join. This looks like Saudi. China also wants Saudi to join in, so especially when also don't want to piss off a member like Saudi, because China also want their oil. So those shady deals don't necessarily happen, because if they do, the ability to able to shake US, especially when US is heavily reliant on Saudi oil right now, you're unable to take down or dethrone the fact that US is the more economic bloc. Not yet. The third level on this, China is also heavily reliant on Malaysia now. THS characterization is true. The fact that China is experiencing inflation, having a property crisis issue, bank is starting to pulling out money and from people to bank is starting to pull multiple stimulus and has huge debt in China. Also looks like China is especially expanding its own debt, especially in the Belt Road Initiative, where all the investment they put on this developed country has been failed because so many countries have default on the loan. Means that China is at a very dire situation that all the country that the investor need to have any return. This looks like going to Malaysia is the other alternative. Since China local people are not spending and people are losing jobs, the only way where China is able to stay sustainable is to sell all their product to overseas, rely on Malaysian purchasing power so that that job opportunity that China still has still able to remain. Because this is where it's uniquely important. Whatever China invests, especially the ECRL trade coming to Malaysia, has to be worth. If they continue to piss off Malaysia, it's going to harm us. So China is also heavily reliant on to ensure that Malaysia is economically relevant. So when US come able to create more job opportunity and more demand and more purchasing power in Malaysia, it's something that China should not piss off, because China is also relying people in Malaysia to produce a product. Hence, conclusion is simple. They don't want to piss. Conclusion in this is simple. They don't want to piss off Malaysia that much, because they want to ensure that that reliance is still there, so that people are able to still sustainable. Before I move to the second question.
So which one is it? Are these emerging economies dependent on China's large GDP for trade use and to improve? Or are they willing to stand up to China and keep them in check?
Malaysia is convenient, I know it's convenient, we even do deal with Russia, so as long as they get money, that's fine. So that's the stand that you kind of need to be clear. I think they are quite clear also. But the fact here is simple. The point here is also wanted to highlight that China will not try to piss you off because China is in economical struggle right now. All the investment that they've done for BRI has not been successful, and they want to ensure there's a return. So this is something that China cannot restrict. The West coming is important. Second clash, why this will not piss off US? Why US will not piss off Malaysia? Because Malaysia is also, like US also rely on Malaysia, because even if it's true they're trying to claim US is starting to be isolationist, but the fact that it's just against China, sanction against China, and also jacking a lot of price tax towards China in the beginning. Hence, the only alternative, US also want to develop microchip, but everywhere is more expensive. Where they turn on Malaysia, we have the expertise, we have the port in Penang. I'm not from Penang, but I think he's proud. I guess I don't know who's from Penang. He's from Penang, semi-conductor, I think. But that's all pre-existing system there is, and it's cheap. We have the labor, we have the expertise, everything there is. So US still go, even if it's about going against China, it's not about going against Southeast Asia with China point of view. It's also about ensure that other alternative exists. It's just against China. The last one, diversification. As it's true as Anwar wanted, this is the most important extension because recognize BRICS has multiple members and more potential members. This is important because there are possible markets that Malaysia has never tapped for, not just Saudi Arabia, Brazil, within South America. This deal is important because going back to the first characterization, this is an economic bloc. This is where you're able to negotiate with them, how you're necessarily able to reduce tariff, and you have more opportunity power, tap into new market, which they don't necessarily recognize to you about how you're necessarily able to diversify. They only tell you it's emerging, about money pumping in, but no, it's also about you, when you invest in this more other country and possible market, means you're able to get multiple return. With this, that's about BRICS.
Thank you for that final speech. Remember, for opposition, get ready.
Understand?
You can tell.
So the only rebuttal that I'm going to do for this previous speaker is the previous speaker said that China is heavily relying on Malaysia. So like if China is already relying on Malaysia, like why do they even need to join BRICS? So first, I'm going to go for my first argument, which is Malaysia can focus more on strengthening the current relationship with Asian country or Islamic countries instead of joining BRICS. So like what is Malaysia's main goal? So first, it is stable relationship, and second is growing into a developed country. So Malaysia is a small country, right? So instead of focusing straight to the big goals, which is BRICS, it's better to focus on the smaller ones first. Why? Because instead of that, it is better for Malaysia to stabilize or strengthen their bond with this country because they have more similar goals and value with this Asian or like Islamic country, right? So like say, Asian countries like Malaysia, they are still developing just like us, like the small countries, and Islamic countries have similar values to Malaysia, which is majority of the religion here is Islam, right? So how is it impactful for Malaysia to not join the BRICS? How is it impactful? Because they can have more stable relationship with others to grow, and then if they have the more stable relationship before joining BRICS, then just go. Just in my point is like stabilize the relationship nearby your country or like the country that can align to your goals and values. Then you can join to the BRICS. So also, if they do this before they join BRICS, right, they can be actually like equal level to those big countries that they stabilize themselves, and they have more like similar things that they can be on par with other countries like China, Brazil, China, Brazil, and all the BRICS countries, right? So with that, Malaysia can actually grow with the steady pace, and then just level by level instead of just high through up joining the BRICS and big goals like that. So for my second argument is BRICS hyper-focus is on de-dollarization. So why is this important? First, because BRICS are hyper-focused on one thing, which is taking down the dollar. So second, as a country, it is still developing, and honestly, there is not much negative impact on us when the dollar is still being used in the global trade. So like, also in other perspective, if euro or renminbi were to become the main currency in the global trade, there is no inherent benefit to Malaysia or the country because, like, this is because we are still a developing country with a developing economy. We do not have a large stake in global trade. Yeah, sure, we have like trades here and there, but we don't have the power, like the largest stakes in the global trade. So why joining BRICS is not a good choice compared to joining the other countries, like the smaller country instead of that, right? So they are mostly developed countries compared to Malaysia, and BRICS, they only talk about making, basically BRICS are just like all talk but no action because they want to talk about making their own currency, but until now we didn't see like where's the new currency, where's that, where's this, where's that. So it is in our world, it is kind of like unnecessary big leap for Malaysia when they can just align with other countries. Yes, in their world, yeah, sure they can go with BRICS, but in our world, we can do the same, but just not with BRICS, and the benefits or the advantages is still somehow similar, or maybe like more stable or more less risk than the BRICS. So with that, I am proud to oppose.
Thank you for your fine speech. Indeed, it was a harm for government side, government federation.
Go ahead.
Before I start, I have no idea how econs work and I'm just trying my best. Still don't understand.
How to go?
So, start by saying 3, 2, 1. So, as we will do a bit of a comparative on what happens on both either side of the house, right? We tell you that number one is the idea that what Farhan has already talked to us about is that Malaysia tapping into the US and China market, and it's a way of diversification that only exists on our side of the house and only in closing government where we fully emphasize it. Right? What this means with the diversification is the idea that when the point in which where you join BRICS is more like, it means that you often tap into these other markets that is untappable. Without joining BRICS in the first place. Right? That means you are able to go into Brazil, you are able to go into Saudi, and those are markets that are non-existent, and it's harder for you to tap because the only reason why it's untappable because now Malaysia focuses on the US and China being relevant in the debate, right? So, just a few comparative on why it is. I think O talked to us about the idea on how we now align with China's interests, and more likely or not. I think Farhan covered that in his speech where he talks to us about the idea that why innovate itself? China will more likely not do that because of pre-existing history that already happens, like in India and Bangladesh. People are more aware of the issue. What this means is that it's no longer a bilateral trade agreement. It means that it is an economic bloc. That means each country wants to get an economic benefit for themselves, right? It means that if China screws over the BRICS, it means that there's no economical value because the BRICS are the spending power for China within the long run, right? Why is this necessarily true, right? Because understand that China heavily still relies on Malaysia in the first place, right? Understand China is going through a deflation process that is happening, right? Which means that the housing crisis that is already there, the housing crisis that is happening in China, which means that China could not get people to spend more of their money within their country, which means that now they have to go outside and look for it, right? No, I don't understand. So, when they have to go outside of it, more often not, we tell you that China sees Malaysia as the most powerful purchasing power. Why this is necessarily true? Because in of itself, Malaysia is already a common ground for where they are able to get cheaper investors in of itself. Right? We tell you that the idea that US won't be pissed at this is because number one, US is only targeted towards China. That means the US still wants to invest their investments into Southeast Asia. They still want to invest all of their investment and diversify and grow their inflation. Right? The reason why Malaysia would be true is because we already have the microchip that is that we already provide the cheap labor that is existing in the first place, right? We already provide the cheaper labor. There's already cheap tariff there. We already have the water to cool all of the micro infrastructure that the US wants to build within Malaysia, right? We tell you that this directly deals with the OO's response on the idea and how now US would be pissed in of itself, and US would now go against Malaysia, right? The second layer why the US won't be pissed in of itself is because US is only targeted to China, because China is using their intellectual property that is in China. They are selling that and making weapons and machineries in of itself. US whole agenda is sanctioning China and not all the other Southeast Asian bloc, right? In a way itself, we're now able to play all sides of ourselves. We tell you, we are able to play all sides of the card, which means that now we are able to still get investors coming in from the US and investors coming in from China as well, and where we're able when we're able to get all of this investment that comes into Malaysia, now this translates into the more job opportunities, and we tell you that it's only exclusive on our side in CG that this happens, right? Where you create that job opportunities and that purchasing power that Malaysia has for Malaysia to spend, right? Because I already explained why China is having that financial crisis, right? The idea that also Farhan talked to us about, I think that no other houses kind of not talked about, is the idea that the US is the point in which now where all the other countries are heavily reliant on the USD, which is the US now, is the point in which where there's a repeat of the 2008 financial crisis, which means that now Malaysia is able to absorb the shock. Countries like BRICS are able to absorb the shock and still grow from it, right? Because they're not heavily reliant and dependent on the US. Okay, fine.
So I think CG proves well that Malaysia might not get screwed if we join BRICS.
Thank you.
But the question that becomes, why can't these benefits be accessed outside of BRICS?
The reason why these benefits could not be accessed outside of BRICS is because the US is the major spending power. So if US kind of falls, all the other country falls, and all the other countries need like an economic form of bloc to protect them. This is why the idea, this is why it is there, right? So, the reason in of it itself is the idea that we are not, we don't twist off both sides of the house. We're still able to garner that form of, at least on our side of the house, we're able to garner that form of investors that we want, which then creates into more purchasing power for Malaysia to join, and for Malaysia to buy more stuff from China. And this is why we tell you that Malaysia and China are heavily codependent on each other. So in a way that if China wants to screw over Malaysia, within the long run, it's more necessarily not going to happen, because if China screw over Malaysia, then they don't have another production or manufacturing firm that exists outside of there, right? The last response is the idea that Malaysia, in of itself, is not China, right? Because Malaysia, why is it more likely for Malaysia to succeed within this BRIC agreement is like the countries and Malaysia within BRIC is not China, which more oftentimes is that China is seen as a communist country, right? Which means the point in which where it's seen as a regime means that it is harder for investors to invest in it because they're oftentimes unsure or uncertain on where these things will go, right? And how it is going to be played out, right? The point in which where we have a democracy that exists within status quo and a democracy that is there, we tell you that the US more oftentimes and still be able to invest into BRICS because we're not a communist. We're not a communist country. We're not a communist regime, which makes a lot of things more better, and it's a better form of government that exists. So I tell you that it's more economical beneficial for Malaysia to join the BRICS.
Regime.
Panel, small fish just cannot mix with big fish because in the end, you will get eaten. In today's debate, we will show you how Malaysia, as a small and developing country, should not focus on issues that the BRICS are focusing on, such as big issues, such as, for example, de-dollarization. These issues are issues that Malaysia cannot afford to focus on because Malaysia is just a small country that should focus on developing themselves. So two goals that Malaysia should focus on, number one is further developing our country, and number two is to develop closer relationships with countries that are more aligned to our goal. This is twofold with two different types of countries. Number one is the ASEAN countries, and number two is Islamic countries. And why is this important and true as per what my member of opposition said? It is important because of number one, proximity to those countries, number two, aligning of the goals with those countries, and number three, as Malaysia's position as a developing country and an emerging economy. Alright, so in my speech today, I'll do a few things. First, I'll go to the rebuttals, and then I'll go to some weighing, and then I'll prove why CO takes this debate. Alright, so moving on to the rebuttals. First of all, OG posits that BRICS is about emerging economies first. But if it's truly about emerging economies first, why have we not seen any example of any country that has been truly improved as an emerging economy by joining BRICS? And also, on the other point is that most of the countries in big BRICS are economic powerhouses like China, India, and Russia. And as a small country who is still developing like Malaysia, the matter of fact is we will not get a huge opportunity to be part of the core BRICS panel, who have been partners for a very long time, and they even have similar goals. Like two examples, some of them are more aligned to things like communism, and they also have countries where large amounts of the population are living in poverty. Besides that, the opening government also said that they don't want to be aligned with anyone, and it is better to distance themselves in the status quo. So if it's better to distance yourself and don't align with anyone, why do you want to align with BRICS? What makes BRICS so much better than other partners such as ASEAN or other Islamic countries? Because, like, you know why ASEAN and Islamic countries are better? Because number one, we are mostly developing countries, and number two, we have similar religious views, which makes it more aligned to our goals, which makes these goals more likely to be further and developed, which makes it even better for our economy to grow and for our country to grow. And besides that, the opening government also said that, oh, we need to act as a counterweight or else we'll get sucked up in the US or China polarization, and we need to get insulated before getting sucked up. But why do we want to put ourselves at the risk of being involved? Because yes, there are mega good points of Malaysia and we have strategic trade routes, and we have the semiconductor industry, but we should not be so eager to align with the next big thing coming up. Instead, we should strengthen the current relationships that we already have. Insulation before getting sucked looks like strengthening current partnerships instead of trying to join whatever new power that suddenly pops up. Alright? And besides that, when explaining why it is important to join the group with BRICS, they focus a lot on how we have the good semiconductor industry and transportation of raw materials through our trade routes. Then why don't we just align with other countries that are nearer to us, that who can also benefit to us to make sea better, which are those ASEAN and Islamic countries which have more incentives to help our emerging economy. And the four incentives, number one is the proximity to us. Number two is when helping to develop our country, they can also in turn develop the whole sea region, or also develop Islamic nations as a whole. And fourthly, they align with our goals and ideologies. Yes, one QI.
OO is not comparative. It's not trying to co-op or benefit from China and US. When we say the benefit comes from forming the link with other emerging economies, which is independent of China investing with us. Please engage.
Yes, but why do you think that these you can truly emerge with these, cooperate with these emerging economies in BRICS? We are telling you now, you didn't even give us a single example of a country who is in BRICS, who is an emerging economy, that has either improved drastically or can help Malaysia somehow fight China together, like in your situation that you mentioned just now. Alright, and now moving on to the CG, they said that they gave a reason why China won't aggressively retaliate. They said that even if China is aggressive, the countries are aware, and then you can consult with them and preempt all these dangerous conditions. But if the countries are so aware, I think you are overestimating how they can go against such a big power such as China. For example, the US-China trade war, right? I mean, even US cannot 100% beat China. Now you're thinking some small emerging countries come together, then suddenly they can fight back against China. And even if you think Malaysia can fight back, can they fight back against that much? Do we even have enough resources to fight back? And then after that, they also mentioned that, oh, China actually relies on Malaysia. But if China really relies on Malaysia, I don't think so, because they are such a big power and they have they are helping many developing economies as well, not just Malaysia. They do not need a small developing country, and they can just as easily pull support from us without much negative impact on them. Besides, all three teams just now, they keep harping on the importance of semiconductor, and as how it's so important to Malaysia. But if it's so important as what previous teams said, why can't Malaysia be developed by now with our so-called so strong semiconductor industry that everyone's fighting over for? This one aspect is definitely not as important as they believe. If not, by now Malaysia would be a developed country, right? And besides that, CG also mentioned on the point of diversification that when you join BRICS, you have more members and then you have more markets. But number one, Malaysia already has certain markets to tap into with the partnerships that we have, and we don't need to join BRICS to tap into new markets. But even if you think, okay, it's better to join BRICS to tap into new markets, it is not as easy as it seems, because it's unlikely. Because like I said, they have yet to show much opening of more markets or any action at all, other than just like talking all the time, and like I don't know where's the proof that BRICS is actually working anyway. And they mostly just focus on the end of the 5 countries of BRICS rather than focusing on the other countries that want to join them as well. So what I want to say is that BRICS is giving all talk no action since its inception. They have just been talking about issues such as wanting to help economies even, or wanting to be dollarized, or whatever action they talk about. They are just talking and they don't actually put any action. What then is the benefit of joining them if we're more likely to get swallowed up as a smaller country and not part of the core 5 countries even? And then moving on to what OO said, yes, we as CO agree that they said for the reasons why they said BRICS is back, because there are unclear checks and balances, it may put pressure on Malaysia, and BRICS is dominated by large countries. But on the other hand, it is still better for Malaysia to focus on relationships that we already have and to further develop it, because it is a win-win situation where we help the other countries that we already have relationship with, and they can help us back. We can work together to engage and emerge our economy with the strength that Malaysia already has, as the government has mentioned, the strategic trade route, the semiconductor industry, and all that. So, in conclusion, BRICS has their own goals and it's not suitable for Malaysia, so don't join BRICS. Proud
That concludes the pre-semifinals. This is the silent round, obviously. You guys will get your decision later in the hall. Across the floor, shake hands, thank you for the and get out.